You're crouched near a fire. Your stomach growls. It's been 2 days since your last bite. You reach for something moving. It's still twitching. You don't care. You bite in. Because back in the Stone Age, dinner didn't wait to die first. What did cavemen actually eat? What crazy things did they do just to survive? From raw meat to bugs crawling in their hands, this isn't the version of history we learned in school. Let's go way back, before fire, before spears, before humans even had proper language. You're out in the wild with nothing but your hands and whatever stones you can find. There's no cooking pot, no campfire, and no grocery store to save you. So what do you eat? Well, anything you can catch, and catch fast. Early humans didn't have time to be picky. They were hungry, vulnerable, and always on the move. The moment something looked edible, they grabbed it, ripped it apart, and ate it right there. No cooking, no seasoning, no second thoughts. That meant raw lizards, frogs, bird eggs, and yes, even bugs that were still squirming. And not just small bugs, big, juicy grubs, the kind that make modern people gag just looking at them. But for a starving caveman, those fat little larvae were pure protein. Easy to catch, full of nutrients, and, let's be real, better than nothing. One of the most shocking parts? They probably didn't even mind the taste. Their tongues weren't used to sugary cereal and spicy chips. To them, a wriggling worm might have tasted like food. That's it. Just food. And it wasn't just bugs. When early humans managed to catch something bigger, like a rabbit or a bird, they didn't always wait to make a fire. They'd eat it raw, tearing through the skin to get to the fatty parts inside. And here's the crazy part. Raw organs like liver and brain were delicacies, full of fat, vitamins, and way easier to chew than muscle. And yeah, they might have still been warm. But why risk eating raw meat? No one told them about bacteria or parasites. For them, survival meant speed. If you waited too long, your food might escape, or someone stronger might take it from you. In the Stone Age, hunger didn't wait for dinner to be cooked. Now imagine trying to eat like this every day, with no knives, no fire, and barely any tools. Teeth and fingernails became your utensils. You'd use sharp rocks to rip into animal hides or crack open bones. And that's when bone marrow entered the menu, soft, fatty, and rich in nutrients. It became a hidden gem of the caveman diet. You see an animal carcass? Maybe leftovers from a predator's meal. The lions got the meat, but what did they leave behind? Bones. And to early humans, those bones were gold. They'd smash them open on rocks and scoop out the marrow. It was one of the few calorie-dense foods they could get without chasing anything. And sometimes even old bones were fair game. Studies show that prehistoric humans often returned to animal skeletons days or even weeks later, just to crack the bones and suck out the last bits of marrow. Not exactly appetizing, but when you're starving, every drop of fat matters. What's even wilder is that some of them started to notice patterns. Certain bones gave more marrow. Some rocks broke bones cleaner. This wasn't just instinct anymore. It was becoming knowledge. Early survival tips passed through grunts and gestures. And while the idea of eating raw meat might sound wild now, it probably didn't stay raw forever. Some archaeologists believe that humans might have used fire earlier than we think. Not always to cook, but to keep warm and scare off animals. Eventually, someone probably dropped a piece of meat into the fire by accident and realized it tasted better, easier to chew, less likely to make them sick. But in the beginning, fire wasn't an option. You didn't wait for flames. You didn't marinate. You didn't even wipe the dirt off. You ate what you caught when you caught it, even if it was still blinking. And if you couldn't catch anything, well, we'll talk about those backup meals in the next part. So what happened when there were no animals around? No bugs, no bones, nothing moving? Cavemen didn't just sit around waiting. They turned to the ground. Literally. Roots, tubers, wild plants. Anything that looked halfway edible was worth a try. The problem? A lot of these were bitter, tough, or even toxic. But again, when your belly's empty, you take the risk. Some plants made them sick, others became survival staples. And here's the thing. They didn't wash them, boil them, or peel the skin. They ate dirt-covered roots straight from the ground, sometimes chewing them for hours just to extract a little starch. Cavemen basically lived on trial and error. If something made you puke or your lips go numb, well, you remembered not to eat that again. Now let's talk about eggs, not the pretty ones from the grocery store. Wild bird eggs, stolen from nests, cracked open and slurped raw. These were quick calories, and unlike meat, eggs didn't fight back. Some were half-formed with feathers and veins, but if it filled you up, you ate it. And then there were frogs and reptiles, easy to grab near water sources. Forget skinning or gutting. Many times cavemen just bit into them whole. You can still find tribes today that eat frogs live, saying the movement actually helps the digestion process. Disgusting? Maybe by today's standards, but back then it was called not dying. What's really crazy is that all of this shaped our bodies. Scientists believe early humans' digestive systems got stronger over time by constantly dealing with bacteria, parasites, and raw diets. It built a kind of resistance we've completely lost today. So yeah, cavemen might have eaten things we'd scream over today, but they were tougher, hungrier, and constantly walking the line between survival and starvation. And this was all before they even had a sharp stick to help them hunt. How did they go from eating bugs to bringing down mammoths with zero weapons? Okay, so now we're past the worm-eating stage. Cavemen are walking upright, a little more organized, maybe even grunting in groups. But here's the problem. They're still hungry, and the big animals aren't getting any slower. Now imagine this. You see a giant deer in the distance. No bow, no spear, no net. Just you and a couple of friends, barefoot. How do you bring it down? The answer is something most people today would never even attempt. You run it to death. It's called persistence hunting, and it's one of the wildest survival strategies ever used. Early humans didn't need to be fast. They just needed to be relentless. Most animals can sprint, but they overheat quickly. Humans? We sweat. We cool off better than almost any other creature on Earth. So a group of hunters would track an animal under the hot sun for hours, sometimes all day, jogging behind it until it collapsed from exhaustion. No traps, no tools, just sheer determination, and a crazy amount of stamina. But that wasn't the only method. Cavemen also learned to chase animals toward cliffs or swamps, places where they could get stuck or fall. Think about how smart that is. They were using nature as a weapon, long before they could make one. And in forests or rocky areas, small groups would work together to surround and confuse prey, using loud noises, sticks, even their own bodies to block escape paths. They weren't just strong, they were strategic. It's easy to think of them as wild and clueless, but these people figured out how to bring down animals twice their size without so much as a sharpened stick. All they had was teamwork, sweat, and instinct. And when the animal finally dropped, the real chaos began, because now you had to deal with blood, bones, and a race to eat before something else came to steal your kill. What happened after the takedown? So let's say your hunting group finally takes something down, maybe a wild boar or an antelope. No weapons, no trucks, no ropes, just tired legs and a fresh kill lying in front of you. Now what? First, you move fast. The smell of blood travels, and in the wild, that means trouble. Lions, wolves, vultures, they're all watching, waiting. You've got minutes, maybe less, to get what you can and get out. There were no metal knives or clean cuts back then. They used sharp stones, jagged edges, even bones from previous kills to tear through the animal. It wasn't neat. It wasn't organized. It was raw chaos. Blood everywhere, hands deep in organs, chewing while still cutting. And no part went to waste. Muscle was valuable, sure, but the organs? That was the good stuff. Liver, heart, kidneys, intestines, all packed with nutrients and soft enough to eat raw. Some even say the brain was considered a sacred food in some early cultures, eaten right there on the spot. But there was a problem. Too much meat. They couldn't carry it all. There were no backpacks or coolers. So they started developing a weird but smart method. Eat as much as you can right now, and hope you don't throw it all up later. And they didn't just eat the meat. They chewed on tendons, gnawed cartilage, and scraped the skin clean with their teeth. If they had time, they might stretch the hide over a rock to dry in the sun, for clothes or shelter later. But most times, it was a frantic feast. Some anthropologists believe this is when roles really started forming. Some people cut, others stood guard, and a few were already watching the skies for vultures. It was primitive, but it was also the beginning of teamwork, leadership, maybe even social rules. The kill didn't just feed the belly, it shaped how humans worked together. But what if they missed the kill? What if they chased an animal all day and came back empty? That's when the real desperation meals kicked in. Let's talk about that in part 3. Not every hunt ended in success. Sometimes the animal got away. Sometimes another predator got there first. And sometimes, after hours of running in the sun, the only thing waiting was an empty landscape and a hungry stomach. So, what now? This is where things got desperate. Early humans weren't just hunters, they were opportunists. If they didn't catch the prey, they looked for what was left behind. That meant scavenging. Rotting carcasses, old kills left by lions, animals that died from disease or age, nothing was off limits. And yeah, it smelled bad, it looked worse. But even half-rotten meat could be scraped, gnawed, boiled later if fire was available. Or just eaten raw if there was no time. The outer parts might be full of maggots or decay, but deep inside, still some muscle, still some marrow. It sounds disgusting now, but to a caveman that was free food, and a chance to survive another day. They also turned to things modern people wouldn't even call food. Tree bark, grass, clay, charcoal. Yep. Some of that actually went into their mouths. Not for calories, but sometimes to settle the stomach, or to help get rid of toxins from other weird foods they were trying. And here's where bugs came back into the picture. Ants, beetles, termites, worms, quick, easy, and full of protein. Kids in some tribes were even taught to snack on bugs between meals. In fact, there's strong evidence that bugs made up a major part of the human diet for thousands of years. What's even more shocking, this diet worked. Despite all the grime and gore, early humans not only survived, they spread. They grew stronger, smarter, and more adaptable because of this constant food struggle. They didn't wait for the perfect meal. They ate what was there. And in doing that, they laid the groundwork for everything that came next. Language, tools, even cooking. But before fire turned meat into dinner, and before tools made hunting easier, they ate like wild animals, with their bare hands and empty bellies. Alright, so you've got no fire, no fridge, and definitely no seasoning. But you're starving. Again. This is where things start getting, well, gross. Let's start with the classic, rotting meat. Yep, on purpose. Some early humans actually buried meat in the ground and let it rot. Just a bit. Not fully decomposed, but soft, fermented, and stinky enough to gag most of us today. Why? Because after sitting underground for a few days, the meat broke down and became easier to chew. They didn't know the science, but they knew the texture changed, and the stomach didn't hurt as much. Sounds nasty, right? But this is still practiced today in a few remote cultures. In Iceland, there's a dish made from buried fermented shark. In Alaska, some groups ferment fish heads underground. So yeah, cavemen weren't crazy, just practical. Next up, animal brains. Warm, mushy, full of fat and nutrients, and extremely easy to scoop out. After a hunt, once the bones were cracked and the organs were gone, the skull was smashed open for the brain. Some scientists even think this became a symbol of strength, like, I get the brain because I'm the leader. It was probably slimy, weird smelling, and slightly warm, but full of omega-3s and calories. That's a meal. Now let's talk about something that really crosses the line for most people. Partially digested stomach contents from herbivores. Yeah, the stuff already inside an animal's belly. Grass, leaves, and fermented plant mush that the prey was digesting when it died. Why eat it? Because early humans had trouble digesting raw plants themselves, but inside the stomach of a deer or bison, it was already broken down. Think of it as pre-chewed salad. Disgusting? Sure, but smart. These weren't just desperate acts. They were clever hacks. Cavemen weren't just eating gross stuff to survive. They were figuring out how to make the most out of every kill. And trust me, the menu gets weirder from here. Alright, so if rotten meat and brains weren't enough to make your stomach turn, let's get into something even more bizarre. Blood. Cavemen didn't just eat the meat. They drank the blood. Fresh from the kill, warm, iron-rich, and often gulped straight from the body. No cups, no fire to cook it. Just pure survival fuel. Why blood? Because it was loaded with salt, protein, and water. 3 things you desperately need when food is scarce. Even today, some traditional tribes in Africa still mix blood with milk and drink it like a health tonic. So yeah, the idea might gross us out, but back then, it was smart nutrition. Now here's a meal that's truly hard to imagine. Bones cooked in their own marrow fat, without fire. How does that even work? Well, cavemen would crack open big animal bones and let them sit out in the sun for days. The fat inside would start to melt and leak out. Then they'd scoop it up and drink it, or use it to soften other dried meats. A kind of Stone Age dipping sauce, if you will. Disgusting, maybe, but effective. And don't forget skin and hooves. They boiled them later, sure, but before fire was a regular thing, they'd chew on dried skin like gum, sometimes for hours, just to get something in their stomachs. Now here's where things get really stomach-turning. There's evidence that some early humans may have practiced survival cannibalism, not as a regular thing, but when things got desperate. Extreme cold, long migrations, famine. If someone in the group died, there are signs that their body wasn't always left behind. It's horrifying by today's standards, but back then, it might have meant the difference between an entire group surviving or vanishing forever. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about doing what you had to do when the world gave you no other options. And if you think that's dark, Wait till you hear about the bugs, bones, and backup snacks they turned to when meat ran out. So the meat's gone. No kill today. Nothing rotting nearby. And your stomach's making those hollow, angry sounds. This is when cavemen got real. Creative. Let's talk about insects again. We already mentioned grubs and worms, but some groups went deeper. Ant larvae, termite queens, spider eggs. Termite mounds became all-you-can-eat buffets. Just crack one open and scoop. It wasn't just last resort food. This stuff was loaded with fat and protein, and a lot easier to catch than wild animals. And the taste? Think nutty, buttery, sometimes sour. It probably wasn't as bad as you'd think, unless it was still moving. But the weirdest part? Some early humans likely farmed insects in a way. They'd revisit bug hotspots, memorize patterns, even protect certain areas so they could come back later and eat more. Kind of like proto-agriculture. Before farming crops, they were farming bugs. And let's not skip bones. Long after the meat was gone, the bones stayed. They cracked open ribs, spines, even skulls just to lick the inside clean. Some bones were roasted if fire was around. Others, eaten raw, chewed to powder, even swallowed in pieces. Some groups even ground bones into dust and mixed it with water or animal fat to make a kind of mushy soup. No bowls, obviously, just hands. Maybe a hollowed-out rock or a big leaf if they were lucky. Now here's something that really crosses the line. Animal dung. Not eaten directly, thankfully, but early humans used it to track prey, identify edible plants, and in some extreme cases, extract undigested seeds or roots from it. Yeah, you read that right. If a goat ate something safe, and it passed through fast enough, a caveman might pluck that same bit out and try it. It wasn't gross. It was recycling, Stone Age style. To us, this all sounds insane, but to them, it was just life. There was no menu, no chef, no guarantee of a next meal. They did what they had to do. And in the next chapter, we'll talk about what they ate when there was truly nothing left at all, and how that desperation changed everything. So let's say you're a caveman. You've gone days without a proper meal. No animals in sight. The plants are dry. Even the bugs are hiding. Now what? This is when the real survival snacks come in. The stuff that most people today wouldn't even call food. Let's start with tree bark. Sounds useless, right? But early humans actually chewed on bark from specific trees. Not for taste, but for fiber, water, and sometimes even medicine. Birch bark, for example, contains compounds similar to aspirin. So when their teeth were aching or their stomachs hurt, cavemen chewed bark like painkillers. They also gnawed on roots and tubers, even if they were hard as rocks. They'd dig up wild yams or cattail roots and spend hours chewing just to squeeze out a few calories. Then there were rocks. Well, not actual rocks, but clay and charcoal. Incredibly, some early humans ate small amounts of clay or burned wood to help absorb toxins when they accidentally ate something poisonous. It's called geophagy, and it still happens today in some places. Think about that. They didn't know what bacteria were, but somehow they figured out that eating dirt could save your life. And if nothing else was around, they'd chew on leather, like old animal hides left over from previous kills. Dried and tough, yes, but still containing a trace of fat and protein. You'd soften it in your mouth like jerky, chew for hours, and maybe swallow some bits just to trick your stomach into thinking you ate something real. It was all about survival. Anything that gave even the slightest bit of energy was fair game. And even when there was nothing, the act of chewing helped keep hunger pains at bay. How cavemen turned bug hunting into a science, and how some of those survival snacks are still eaten today. So, bug hunting. Sounds simple, right? But cavemen didn't just randomly dig up dirt or knock over logs. They got smart about it. Over time, early humans learned exactly where and when to find the good stuff. They noticed that termite mounds were best cracked open in the cool of the morning, that certain beetles hid under moist bark, that worms came out after rain. It wasn't random. It was observational knowledge passed down through the tribe. In fact, some believe children were trained early on to spot safe insects and avoid dangerous ones. Bright colors? Probably poisonous. Dull and fat? That's dinner. Some tribes even use smoke to flush out insects from their hiding places. Not only did it make the bugs easier to catch, it stunned them, made them stop moving. And bugs weren't just backup food. They were nutritional powerhouses. Think about it. Grasshoppers are loaded with protein. Ant eggs have fat. Even cockroaches, as gross as it sounds, have more iron than beef. There's even fossil evidence that early humans may have used stones to grind up insects into paste, kind of like a prehistoric protein bar. No packaging, no label, just pure squishy calories. And this wasn't just some old survival method lost in history. All over the world, people still eat insects today. In Mexico, it's chapulines, seasoned grasshoppers. In Thailand, fried crickets are a street snack. In Africa, mopane worms are a delicacy. So maybe the cavemen were ahead of their time, because now, scientists say insects might be the food of the future, sustainable, nutrient-rich, and way less damaging to the planet than cattle. Cavemen didn't eat bugs because they were trying to be eco-friendly. They did it because they had no choice, and because they figured out what worked. That's what survival is. You learn what keeps you alive, and you stick with it. Next up, we'll go deeper into the final backup plan. Bones, ashes, and what they ate when literally nothing else was left. So, you've eaten all the bugs. You've chewed on bark, dug up roots, even licked tree sap like a starving squirrel. But what if nothing's left? No plants, no insects, no meat, just bones. Dry, cracked, leftover bones. For most people, that's trash. But to early humans, that was round two. Cavemen learned how to get every last bit out of animal remains. Even when the meat was long gone, they'd still break open big bones to suck out hidden marrow, crack skulls for fatty tissue inside, grind smaller bones into dust, then mix it with water or animal fat to make a gritty, glue-like paste. Gross, but packed with calcium and minerals. Even burnt bones, left behind from old fires, were valuable. Cavemen would scrape the blackened crust off and eat it. Not for taste, but for survival. Burnt bone powder might have even helped with digestion or detox. Now here's where it gets even darker. There's evidence that when things got truly desperate, like during long winters, droughts, or when they were trapped, some early humans boiled old leather, dried hides, or animal sinew into a thin, gluey soup. Boiling sounds normal, right? Except we're talking about tossing scraps into a hollowed-out rock, adding water, and dropping in hot stones straight from a fire to heat it. No pot, no stove, just burning rocks and boiled scraps. And yes, some even ate ashes. Charcoal from old fires, sometimes mixed into food, was thought to settle the stomach or help with food poisoning. And it actually can, in small amounts. These weren't meals. They were survival tricks, passed down, tested, repeated. To us, it might sound unthinkable. But to them, this was just another part of life. You didn't waste anything. Not even bones. Not even fire remains. Because when the wild offers you nothing, you find something. Or you don't make it. Cavemen weren't just savage survivors. In Chapter 5, we'll break the myth and show you how smart, inventive, and even food-savvy they really were. Okay, picture a caveman. He's grunting, covered in mud, club in hand, dragging something. Maybe clueless, definitely hungry. Sound familiar? That's the image most of us grew up with. The classic dumb, hairy brute who barely knew how to start a fire. But here's the twist. That image? It's complete nonsense. Cavemen, or more accurately, early humans, weren't just survivors. They were innovators, engineers, thinkers. They were using problem-solving skills thousands of years ago that some people today wouldn't even attempt without a YouTube tutorial. Let's start with food. They didn't just stab things and eat them raw. They figured out how to cook different plants to remove toxins. That's right. Some roots and seeds were dangerous unless you soaked them, roasted them, or buried them in ash for days. And they knew that. They learned it, remembered it, taught it. They understood timing, like when certain fruits ripened or when animals migrated. They used smoke to preserve meat and dry it for later. They made containers out of animal stomachs or tree bark to store liquids, honey, and seeds. Some groups even learned how to ferment, creating early versions of alcohol or preserved foods. That's not just survival. That's experimentation. That's science. Now here's something wild. Recent discoveries show that cavemen used spices, crushed herbs and seeds, to season their food. Not just for flavor, but also for medicinal reasons. That means they weren't just eating to survive. They were choosing, combining, testing. And their tools? We'll get into that in the next part. But spoiler alert, they were way more complex than you'd guess. The dumb caveman myth is dead. Coming up in part 2, how stone tools, glue, and even prehistoric surgery prove they were far more advanced than you've ever imagined. Alright, let's talk tools. Most people think cavemen just smashed rocks together until something sharp popped out. But the truth? They were doing precise engineering, with zero modern equipment. Archaeologists have found obsidian blades sharper than surgical scalpels, made by early humans over 30,000 years ago. That's not smashing. That's craftsmanship. And get this, they didn't just find a sharp edge and call it a day. They created multi-part tools, stone blades attached to wooden handles using rope made from plant fibers, and then sealed with a natural glue they made from pine resin and charcoal. That's composite technology. Still think they were dumb? Some even used boiling water techniques to soften animal bones or wood before shaping them into tools. Meaning they understood temperature control and transformation of materials. And it gets even weirder. There's evidence that Neanderthals, yes, the so-called dumb cousins, performed rudimentary brain surgery. One skull, over 50,000 years old, had a hole carefully carved into it. And here's the shocking part. The person survived. The bone showed signs of healing. That means they had tools precise enough to remove bone. They understood head trauma, and they possibly used plants or herbs as painkillers or antibiotics. Not bad for a group we once labeled as primitive. Oh, and remember how we talked about glue? They made it over open flames, regulating the temperature to keep it from burning, which scientists today admit is incredibly hard to do even in controlled labs. So the next time someone throws around the term caveman as an insult, just remember, these people were masters of survival and genius-level engineers with zero metal, no electricity, and definitely no Wi-Fi. In fact, some of their techniques are still used today in traditional societies around the world. But what about their culture? Were they just grunting in caves, staring at fires? We go deep into their art, music, rituals, and maybe even the first sparks of religion. You won't believe what they left behind. All right, Let's leave the bones and blades behind for a moment and step into the mind of a caveman, because these people didn't just survive. They felt, they feared, they loved, and they believed. Let's start with art. Inside caves across Europe, from France to Spain, archaeologists have found breathtaking murals, some dating back over 40,000 years. These weren't doodles. These were huge, complex paintings of animals, symbols, handprints, created using natural pigments, torches, and even scaffolding systems to reach high cave ceilings. And here's the wild part. They had depth, motion, perspective, like they understood visual storytelling. So why did they paint? We may never know exactly, but here's what scientists think. Spiritual rituals, hunting magic, or maybe even early communication systems. And then there's music. Yes, music. In a cave in Germany, archaeologists found a 43,000-year-old flute made from the wing bone of a vulture. It's carefully carved with finger holes that match our modern musical scale. So while we picture grunts and growls, they may have been singing, dancing around fires, drumming, telling stories, mourning, celebrating. Now let's talk about burials. Primitive people didn't just toss their dead aside. They buried them, carefully. Sometimes with flowers, tools, animal bones, or red ochre, a kind of symbolic pigment. This tells us something huge. They probably believed in an afterlife. Or at least they had some idea of soul or spirit. That's not just survival instinct. That's philosophy. That's emotion. That's culture. They cared for the sick. They stayed with the injured. Some lived with disabilities for years, which means others must have fed them, protected them, kept them alive. That's empathy. That's love. So were cavemen primitive? Or were they the first poets, musicians, and philosophers? In the end, the joke's on us. We've spent decades laughing at cavemen, while they were probably singing under the stars, painting their stories, and wondering about the meaning of life, long before we built cities or wrote books. So, could you survive the Stone Age? Let's be honest. Most of us wouldn't last an hour. We rely on smartphones, grocery stores, and GPS to get through a regular day. But they faced predators, starvation, freezing nights, and enemy tribes every single day. And they didn't just survive. They adapted. They built tools, created language, invented fire, and painted stories that echo across tens of thousands of years. They weren't stupid. They weren't brutes. They were engineers of survival, guardians of fire, and authors of the human legacy. In their world, everything mattered. The crack of a twig in the forest, the shift in wind, the stars overhead. And yet, in our high-speed, ultra-connected modern life, we've become disconnected from the very instincts that kept us alive. Maybe it's time we stop mocking cavemen and start learning from them. Because while they lived without electricity, they had something we're losing: awareness, resilience, and raw human connection. So next time you grumble about a Wi-Fi outage, think of a mother in the Ice Age, huddling by a fire, praying her child makes it through the night. Now that's survival. If this blew your mind, don't keep it to yourself. Hit, like if you gained a new perspective. Subscribe for more stories that history forgot. And drop a comment. Would you survive 24 hours in the Stone Age? Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about what it means for us, right now. And trust me, the past is far stranger, wilder, and more human than you've ever imagined.